Hello and welcome back to Brewer's Bastion, where every week we dive into new D&D content. Today we're shaking things up a little from our normal homebrew only features, and we're going to discuss some methods for building homebrew that intentionally makes your world more engaging as a DM. To do this, I'm going to work you through my process of creating a small piece of homebrew that's designed to increase player immersion without necessarily having to have the players be threatened or even interact with the homebrew, but making it a unique part of the world. Let me know in the comments if you have any unique methods of your own to increase immersion. There's tons of ways to do this, so I'm excited to hear from you what has worked at your table. Without further ado, let's step on in and create some immersion. Step one, find an exciting idea. Now, note I did specifically say find an exciting idea, not necessarily create one. If you have an original idea, that's awesome, but nowhere in the D&D rules does it say don't take any inspiration from other material. Quite the opposite, in fact. There's a large list at the end of the DM's guide of additional reading and material that you can use for inspiration. So find your exceptional idea, whether it's original to you or whether it appears in a video game, a movie, or even a book you've been reading. Those who recognize the reference will likely enjoy it all the same, feeling like they're in the know regarding your inspiration. For our example, I'm going to go with blood lilies, a terrifying plant introduced in a book series I read as a kid called Dragons of Deltora. Honestly, I don't remember how good the book series was. I don't remember hardly anything about it except for that I really liked blood lilies and I thought they were a really cool, fantastic thing that existed in the book. So we're going to use them as our baseline. In the books, blood lilies are plants that emit a numbing pollen that stops creatures from experiencing pain, while insects called fleshbanes that disguise themselves as blood lily petals devour the numbed creatures from the legs up, eating them alive before they even know what's happening. In this case, we're going to combine the two into a single entity. Our homebrew piranha lilies will be carnivorous plants that emit pollen that numbs their prey, while Venus flytrap-like appendages that hide behind their large red petals devour the creatures that walk through fields of these flowers. Okay, so we have our basic concept, right? So now, step two, create lore that ties the homebrew into your world. You might start by asking questions and coming up with the answers for each of them. For instance, where do piranha lilies grow? Are they well known in the world, or are they rare and hardly ever heard of? Are there any groups that cultivate the plant, and if so, why? Questions like that. So let's answer these questions. Where do they grow? Let's say piranha lilies grow in high mountain peaks and passes, upper elevation areas that aren't frequented by normal people. Thus, for our second question, are they well known? No, they're not particularly well known outside of the groups that live inside these mountain passes. But there are people who do know about them. Third question, are there any groups that cultivate this plant? Well, it'd be a bit boring if there weren't, so yes, let's say there are tribes within these areas that cultivate piranha lilies. But why would they do that? And if they cultivate them, they have to have some way of avoiding being put in danger by them, right? Okay, a few more questions to answer. Why cultivate piranha lilies? What if, let's say the tribes that use them cultivate them as natural barriers against their enemies, protection against people who would try to invade their territory. That seems like a good starting point, so we can go with that. Now, how do they avoid being eaten by the piranha lilies themselves? If they cultivate these plants, they're going to have to stay safe from them somehow. After considering this one for a little while, the idea that finally came to mind for me was let's say these lilies respond to particular songs or rhythms. We'll have the tribes that cultivate them know these songs, or even better, cultivate them specifically so that those strains of lilies will recognize specific tunes. That way, we can have multiple tribes living within the mountains, and each tribe has their own specific strain of piranha lilies, each strain specifically recognizing and responding to a particular tune, almost like a passcode into each tribe's village. You can only make it through the piranha lilies if you know how to hum, sing, or whistle the correct tune. Okay, so this is really starting to take shape. Now that we have our idea in place, we can do some extra lore building based on what we already have figured out about these lilies. If these lilies are specifically cultivated by these tribes, destroying the lilies is likely an act of extreme aggression, likely to be so severe that it could even lead to war. Thus, we can start to build a culture around these flowers. Maybe your players are visiting these tribes living in the mountains, and they run across a group of tribespeople having an argument, and they hear an unfamiliar insult, something like, "May your lilies burn," followed by an eruption of anger, showing that this phrase is extremely confrontational. You could have the players meet a group from the mountains and recognize that it seems that, in spite of their very different personalities, all of them seem to have perfect pitch, or that they regularly sing, whistle, or hum. Over generations, music has become an extremely important part of these tribes' cultural identities. Not just because musical aptitude is a nice skill to have, but it's necessary if you want to leave or enter the village alone. If you dive into themes of class warfare or caste systems, you could even have a lower class within the mountain tribes, referred to as the songless, people who are looked down on because they can't hold a tune, and thus they're unable to enter or leave the villages in which they were born without assistance. You could go so many different directions that I'm already excited about introducing these themes or lore into a one-shot or campaign next time I run one. Now, all that's left to do is come up with the mechanics of how these lilies work if your players run afoul of them. Note that your players don't actually have to have any experience with the lilies themselves for this to be an immersive and plot shaping addition to your world, but we should be prepared in case they do run into them. So, now we design how the lilies work if someone walks into the field. We don't want them to be an immediate death sentence. That's not the idea behind this homebrew, but we do want them to be threatening and dangerous. So, let's start small. At the end of a player's turn, if a player's within an area populated by piranha lilies, they'll take 1d6 slashing damage. Not very much, won't even take out a level 1 character in most cases, and so nothing to be terribly worried about. However, let's increase the damage based on how long a creature stays in the field, making this exponential, not linear. Very dangerous. For every turn that a creature stays in the field of lilies, the damage they take at the end of their turn increases by 1d6. 2d6 at the end of turn 2, 3d6 at the end of turn 3, etc., etc. We also need some way to represent the lily's ability to numb the characters so they don't realize they're taking this damage. So, since this is spread through pollen, as we've established already, it stands to reason that a constitution saving throw makes sense here. So, when a creature enters an area populated by piranha lilies, it must make a DC 15 con saving throw. On a failed save, the creature becomes numb and is unable to recognize when it takes damage. You could tell your players this if they're really good at role playing and staying in character, or if you'd like to keep it a surprise, you can just note that they have failed and not tell them when they take damage. That will mean a little extra paperwork for you, keeping track of how much damage they've taken and what their maximum HP is, but it shouldn't last too long. We want to make sure that at least most of your players can escape and survive this encounter. It's not designed to kill them. So, whenever a creature takes damage, it can repeat the con save, ending the effect on a success. And then you can tell the player how much damage they've taken while they were numbed, and that they were numbed in the first place. It would also stand to reason that even though the piranha lily's massive red petals obscure the character's legs, if they're perceptive enough, they could notice a flash of blood that's a slightly different color than the petals, or realize that they have no feeling. So, let's tack on an additional method of detecting these lilies' effects. A character that makes a successful DC 15 perception check can determine that they've been numbed. Depending on how dangerous you want the lilies to be, you can either increase or decrease the DC of these saving throws and decide whether you prompt the perception check or wait for your players to ask if they can make one. And that's it. We now have a unique, engaging, exciting, plot relevant piece of fantasy flavor that is 1. Unique and regional, 2. Immerses the players in the lore and culture of the area, and 3. Sets up possibilities for plot hooks, conflicts, and even player encounters within your campaign. The idea is simple enough that you can introduce it to your players within about 5 minutes of gameplay, but robust enough that the mere existence of these lilies could shape an entire campaign period. Heck, I can think of a number of ways I could run an entire one shot or maybe even campaign based around the starting point of one tribe's blood lilies being attacked by an unknown aggressor. sparking outrage that might just result in a full-scale tribal war unless the party can figure out who is at fault and bring them to justice first. So, there you have it. A simple but effective method of designing homebrew that will be engaging and exciting, and it doesn't even necessarily have to threaten your players. As always, thanks for watching. And don't forget to like and subscribe so I can keep on making videos like this one. Huge thanks to my patrons on Patreon for supporting my efforts. Head on over to Brewer's Bastion on Patreon if you want to join and get access to all of my weekly homebrew, including these blood lilies. That's all for today. Until next time, may your wit be as sharp as your sword.